if Gyökeres comes in, the feeling was that Arsenal were a striker away. They go and get the striker, go compete with Liverpool.
Manchester United against Arsenal. But then after that, we've got some... Well, it's a pretty tricky start to the season, really, for both teams. I think, Witty, is the overriding feeling into this one. Fulham, Burnley, Manchester City and Chelsea after that. We've got Leeds, Liverpool, Forest and then City for Arsenal. I suppose the first question as we move on from this, who needs a bigger result in that first game because of what's to come? Because both of them, as we've seen there, have got a difficult start to the season by their standards.
Yeah, I think you can kind of counterbalance the arguments of Arsenal needing to do something in this season, win something big to justify this era. Mikel Arteta, I think we're now arriving at the point where it's got to be a major honor of some kind that they win this year. And if they lose on the opening day to Manchester United, that is not a good start. I think, though, the bigger argument is this Ruben Amorim process. I think so much of what we've seen from him is taking the lumps and taking the difficulties of implementing what he's wanted to do at Manchester United and say, you know what, I don't care if you're telling me that this player doesn't fit this system and this player you better use this way and we're losing all these games. I'm ready to implement something for the longer term. I think the longer term at Manchester United, in terms of the forgiving of bad results, is about 9 months. That's about what he's had in the job. He's got to get off to a good start. He's got to show that the turnaround is on. It's not going to be another year of being mid-table and out of Europe again. That cannot be accepted from Manchester United. So I think in terms of the start and in terms of the difficulty of that fixture list, away at Fulham in the second game of the season, you have an early Manchester derby as well. They've got to get points on the board. They've got to get a feeling like some kind of turnaround is on. Whereas I think Arsenal have plenty of time over the course of the season to get things right.
I think for United as well, they were lucky in some ways that the disappointment, the overwhelming disappointment of that performance in the Europa League final against Spurs came right at the end of the season, and then it's the summer and, oh, well, let's forget about it because we're not playing again for a little while. But I think if they start the season poorly, lose heavily to Arsenal and underperform in some of those big games coming up after that, memories of that performance will come back to the Manchester United fans very, very quickly. So I agree with you there. Ruben Amorim is under a huge amount of pressure to start the season strongly and show that this team has changed, has moved forward. As for Arsenal, how much of it is into who they sign over the summer? We all think that Gyökeres or a big name striker is going to eventually sign for them prior to that game at Old Trafford. You mentioned there what you said about Mikel Arteta, that this is where he's going to get judged. You've made the signings and this is now where they need to deliver. With these big signings and presuming a big name striker comes in, how much does that elevate the expectation from the fans?
Significantly, because I think last season, particularly towards the end, after the Saka injury, after the Odegaard injury, and even as well after their push in the Champions League, knocking Real Madrid out of the competition, making it to a semi-final, there was at least a feeling of, okay, we got something out of the season. It might not have been what we wanted. We got something given the circumstances, and ultimately we have an arm time behind our back with the injuries and with the striker situation. We've been talking about the striker situation for so long. To finally get one over the line, Gyökeres, a player who's leading the scoring charts for club and country for the last calendar year, for the last 18 months, there will be a genuine expectation that he's a 20-goal scorer, and what happens when you add a 20-goal scorer into the midst of an already good Arsenal team with the best defense in the Premier League last season, only giving up 34 goals, and in a midfield that's added Martin Zubimendi, replacing Thomas Partey. That is an upgrade in a variety of respects. And I think Noni Madueke is likely to come through the door. I think he could be a huge introduction in those wide positions to be a different kind of option, particularly on that left side where I think is another position that they needed to improve. They still have things in the hopper. They're apparently interested in Eberechi Eze to maybe come in as another signing. But if Gyökeres comes in, the feeling was that Arsenal were a striker away. They go and get the striker, go compete with Liverpool. I think, and Manchester City and all the other top contenders in the league. I think that will be the feeling if that happens.
I think the answer to this is obviously a resounding no, but you feel, don't you, that the Arsenal fans would not suffer, particularly if they do manage to get a big-name striker in, which we think they'll do, another trophyless season, that this can't continue. The Arteta project has to deliver some silverware, doesn't it?
Yeah, we should say, though, it's quite hard to do that. And look, they've been on an upward trajectory. You go from, 56th and 8th to second on 89 points. You've improved 33 points over the course of 5 seasons. Last year was an undoubted step backwards. I think a part of that sort of mitigates it is, I mentioned, the injuries and the performance in the Champions League. But I still think that for Arsenal, and it's not even necessarily, I don't think if they win one of the domestic cups, let's say they finished in second or third, they go out in a quarterfinal or semifinal of the Champions League, and they win the FA Cup or they win the Carabao Cup. I don't think that will be. I don't think so. I think we're talking about the big things. Arsenal being at the top of the perch of English football again. They haven't been there in 20 years. Winning the Champions League, they've yet to do that in their club's history. That's the kind of thing. I think if they go out and maybe if they win both domestic cups, they do a domestic double, maybe you're kind of in the ballpark. But I think this is about the major stuff. This is about being the best club in England, the best club in Europe. They've been pushing towards that territory for a long time, and they haven't been able to get over the line. So I think that's the level that we're talking about with Arsenal here. And I think if this summer comes off as they're meant to, they will have the armament, but still, it's incredibly difficult. I think we see these Premier League teams reloading. PSG are going to be incredibly difficult to beat the Champions League. You know, the Spanish Giants and Bayern will be there as well. It's going to be tough sledding for them to actually go and do that, because I don't think right now you can definitely say they're the best team in either of those competitions, but they will have a chance to be that.
Talking of reloading, Manchester United haven't really been able to do much reloading so far. It's a combination of factors, trying to get players out the door, as we know they are attempting to do, and the fact that they lost that Europa League final, so they're not in the Champions League. Can't promise that to players that are going to be brought in, but you do feel like Ruben Amorim is having a tougher time in the transfer market than perhaps he would have wanted to.
Well, the owners have come out and talked about the financial situation at the club. Jim Ratcliffe did an interview a few months into the season where he goes, we could run out of money by Christmas if we don't make these kinds of changes, cut staff and all the things that they need to do. They clearly then need to sell to buy. And we're 2 months into the transfer window.
And these guys are on big money, aren't they?
And these guys are on huge money, and that makes it incredibly prohibitive to go and do it. Actually, we were talking about this before the show, and someone on our production staff made a great point. In some ways, you don't want to make the same mistake Manchester United did by buying these players or giving them big contracts. And so I think that's the biggest thing. We clearly saw that Marcus Rashford, and we saw a picture there of Anthony, thrived in a different context. But who's willing to take on the kind of financial risk that you need to take on to, say, give Anthony anywhere near the money he's on now, or Marcus Rashford anywhere near the money he's on now? You look at some of these other clubs. Newcastle are going for more young up and coming. Your Alangas, your Ekitikes. Liverpool went out and went big on Florian Wirtz. You're running out of options. You're running out of options for some of these players because there aren't that many clubs that can afford them. So I think that's the biggest thing. We're talking about buying, and Bumo, they already got Cunha done, but if they're going to keep going, and I think they need to add in central midfield. We talked about how threadbare that central midfield was. I think in that back three, they need maybe 2 center backs to really make it work. If they're going to keep adding and adding and adding, they've got to sell at some point. And right now, the market looks dry for those players.
Certainly does. We'll have an update on that Brian Mbeumo from Brentford to Manchester United situation a little bit later on in the show. Here are those fixtures for the opening weekend, match day 1 in the Premier League. Any others that you pick out there, Witty? I mean, I'm looking forward to watching Aston Villa against Newcastle on the 16th from Villa Park. It will be, I think, one of those statement games really for both sides, who had good seasons last season, didn't they?
Yeah, I'd also pick out Liverpool-Bournemouth from this lot as well. I know that Bournemouth will go into that game as heavy underdogs, with Liverpool going again in the summer, maybe going for Ekitike, having brought in Florian Wirtz and Kirkez and Frimpong, but we also saw Bournemouth have an incredible season last year. We also saw them bringing a great goalkeeper, in my opinion, in George Petrovic. I know it's difficult. Usually that opening day is kind of a crowning game for whoever's hosting it, especially if it's the defending champion. But I think that could be a difficult day out for Liverpool against Bournemouth.